teaching. And yeah, I'm happy to answer questions about it if anyone has any. Yeah, Greta.
I was just wondering what the typical length is, because one thing that really deterred me from either getting a PsyD or PhD is that one, I don't want to be in debt, but two, just the length. And I was looking at the Rutgers description that Miriam sent, and it looked like it was only 3 years, but I don't know if I misunderstood that.
No, you're right. It's 3 years and it's so it's kind of interesting. It's like a full-time degree, but you do it part-time. So our classes are Friday, Saturday, Sundays once a month. And most DSWs are built that way, that they're like either hybrid or online. Ours is in person. So you come to campus Friday, Saturday, Sunday once a month, and then you're doing work remotely. It's designed to be done in 3 years. Most of them are 3-year programs. And because we're all going for CSWE accreditation, the minimum requirement of experience that a social worker needs to have before applying to a DSW is 2 years of clinical practice. And a license. You don't have to have a clinical license, but you do need a license. Other questions I can help you with? I would love an honorary doctorate. That's great.
And the other thing that Rohan just brought up, I always tell people that oh, you have a PhD, you're so smart. Let me tell you, I found out that in that program, that is not the case. That you don't have to be like, you literally just have to finish your program. That's what
Mhm.
you gotta finish.
It's
Um,
it's great. It's all about the time and making it part of your life and scheduling the time to do it. And whoever does that gets it done.
so in your opinion, who would be if someone was thinking about should I apply for a DSW program, I guess what would you say to someone that was thinking about it? Like, what would be the determining factor? I know it's different for different people, but
Hmm.
like obviously they need to be want to go back to school, but I guess what would be the benefit of getting a DSW?
So we kind of use this like scholar practitioner framework where DSWs use research and they translate it to different stakeholders and audiences. So unlike a researcher that, oh, I'm spotlighted now. Hey, um, unlike researchers that are spending many years on one research project, that are in a lab, that are doing assessments, DSWs apply research to the field right away, and they use that to answer problems and to address questions that come up in the field. But they're working directly with folks with lived experiences like social workers do from a really clinical angle. So they're really just kind of amassing knowledge about a particular area of interest. So number one, I would say is you need to find your area of interest. Like, what are you passionate about? For me, it's reproductive justice and reproductive rights. So, all of my work centers on translating reproductive justice, which I'll explain to you tonight. It kind of like translates reproductive justice to different audiences and kind of unites social work with reproductive justice. But for students that I have in my program, it can be anything. It can be abolition, for example, and like critiquing the child family systems. It can be, I have a student who's doing work on schizophrenia and family support. I have students that are doing all kinds of different areas that they're seeing kind of has a need for more research and like practice. So I would say, find something that you feel passionate about, find a problem in the field that you want to solve or an approach that you're doing that you think no one else is doing that you want to share with other people. And then you just kind of like use the research that's out there to become an expert in that area. And then what's great is you get to publish, you get to write books, you get to write articles, you get to, in our program, you create a website. You write 2 articles and create a website. So you're kind of like delivering information to important or people that care about the issue across like a wide variety of forums. So it's a lot of fun. Like we find what you're passionate about and then you just kind of learn more about it and become an expert in that field. It's just a little different from research in terms of you're not learning like major, so you're all probably taking research classes right now or kind of intro to research class. In a PhD, you get very much in-depth qualitative and quantitative research training, like statistics, some qualitative research. DSW programs typically don't train you in like deep, like quantitative research, but they do interviewing and qualitative research as well. So you learn how to do some of that. I know that was a lot.
I don't have a question, but I just want to state I'm from New York, so I'm right across the border from you.
Yeah.
Um, I've been to New Jersey like once, so I was in New York. I had a friend, she got her master's from Rutgers, so pretty cool seeing a fellow upstater talking down here.
That's awesome. And I also teach at the NYU DSW. I teach a course there in publication development. So their DSW is a little bit different. Theirs is more psychoanalytic and psychodynamic, although I think their director is looking to kind of change that. And their requirement is you need 2 publishable papers and 1 conference presentation. So again, each DSW has its own flavor, has its own kind of area of focus, but I think our program, I mean, I'm biased. I think our program's really good. I got my DSW at Penn like many years ago, and I had to write a dissertation for my DSW. That dissertation turned into a book that that has been published commercially, and so you can do a lot with the DSW. You can teach, you can write, you can become an advanced supervisor, you can work on policy stuff. There's a lot of stuff that you can do.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I love that they are thinking so forward about that. That's so great. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So tonight we're gonna talk a little bit about I was telling the class that it's perfect. Like I didn't really design it like this, but it just so happened that we are transitioning into different age kind of groups. So we went into theories, but now it's going more into like the lifespan kind of areas. So our first lifespan is conception, pregnancy, and that like infancy stage. And so I was like, oh, this is perfect. Talking about reproductive justice. So take it away. They're really eager and excited. So
All right. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to talk to you all about reproductive justice, especially as anti-oppressive practice. So I have a whole presentation for you all. I'm going to share my screen and go to my PowerPoint. Okay. Hopefully you all can see that. I even have a little video to share with you tonight. So we got the whole package. Let me take off these subtitles. Okay. So tonight we're going to talk about the tenets of reproductive justice, and we're going to talk about how RJ applies to anti-oppressive practice. So first, I wanted to just kind of outline for you all what anti-oppressive practice is. It really identifies the origins of oppression in society through those power structures that have been used to control and coerce individuals. So those structures have been dictated by white supremacy, colonialism, Western modalities of thought, and traditional hierarchy. And they've been used to police people and keep some people in power and keep certain people at the top and other people oppressed at the bottom. What AOP does is really try to dismantle these oppressive practices, especially by using critical self-reflection and critical theories to analyze where power is located, both in ourselves and in structures in society, and how this power can be used to cause harm. So when we think about doctors and patients, we think about how doctors have caused harm to patients, especially when we look at Black birthing people and morbidity and mortality rates. People who die in childbirth, separations of families by child protective workers that are often families of color, for example. There's harsh inequalities there. So anti-oppressive practice really uses this critical lens to say, these are white supremacist kind of policing powers that are causing harm for folks. And in order to dismantle harm, we need to use other ways of thinking and knowing. So we need to use things like indigenous thought and ancestral technologies, things like critical race theory. We need to acknowledge our own positionality, which means we need to look at where power exists in ourselves and privilege in ourselves, and then other areas of our identities where we may be oppressed, right? Because we're all intersectional. We all kind of have multiple identities. We look at postmodernism, which is really a theory that talks about how every person's perspective is their own reality, anti-colonialism, and reproductive justice. So for transformation to happen, social workers need to address their own positionality, engage in understanding our clients' experiences of oppression, and we need to really take out the hierarchy of the therapeutic relationship, so that it's not kind of like therapist-client, but it's an equal playing ground where it's therapist and client are working together, and your client actually is really the expert in their own life and is teaching you, and you're the guide on the side there, trying to support them in the decisions that they make, and you're also trying to see how they've been impacted by systems of oppression. So I love this quote by Audre Lorde, which says, "The master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house." Does anyone have an idea what that means exactly, what she's saying here? And you can just kind of shout it out, unmute yourself and shout it out if you like.
You can't change the system by working within the system.
That's right, Miriam. Exactly. So you need to find other ways beyond the traditional systems in order to burn it all down, to tear it all down and rebuild. So an RJ perspective is very much an abolitionist perspective that says that what we're doing right now is not working, and we need to find other technologies to kind of rebuild and recreate our world for justice. So RJ is this movement building and organizing framework, and it looks at how reproductive oppression is the result of an intersection of multiple oppressions, and it's really connected to the struggle for social justice and human rights. So when we look at social institutions, the environment, economics, and culture, they affect each birthing person's reproductive life. That means that we use a human rights framework in RJ to really understand how we can move beyond just the United States and the US Constitution to empower people. RJ kind of moves beyond just reproductive rights. Reproductive rights focuses on legal access to things like abortion. But reproductive justice is so much more than that. It's social justice plus those legal access issues plus dismantling white supremacy. That's really what reproductive justice is. So RJ comes out of the 1970s, around the time that Kimberly Crenshaw is writing about intersectionality. And she's saying that, you know, again, we all have multiple identities, but there are some folks in society who have multiple oppressed identities, and those identities are compounded by systemic inequity. So there was a group of Black feminist activists who basically said, you know, there are a lot of white feminists that are part of the pro-choice movement. In the 1970s, they're talking about access to abortion and women's rights. And this group of Black scholars and activists basically say, you know what, not everyone has access to reproductive choice. Depending on your immigrant status, your disability status, if you're queer, the language you speak, the environment, your socioeconomic status, all of these affect whether you have access to reproductive choice. So it's the organizing of Black, Latina, Native American, Asian, and queer people in the 1990s that are responding to this kind of narrow view of reproductive rights that are coming from white feminists who don't appreciate these kind of oppressions that impact whether a person has access to true choice in their lives. So reproductive justice calls attention to the historical absence of reproductive health care in the lives of generations of women and birthing people of color. This is not to say that birthing people of color didn't create their own reproductive health care. We know that there were midwives and doulas in Black communities pre-colonial period, and their technologies were actually stolen from them and appropriated by the white medical system. So it's that system that has denied them reproductive health care and has taken the knowledge out of their hands. So RJ really says that there are these white supremacist systems that have said who could be a parent, under what circumstances, and how many children they could or could not have, which of course they're placing priority on white birthing. So when we look at the legacy of people who were enslaved in this country, and we see just the absolute kind of obliteration of their reproductive choice in their lives, we also need to note that they fought back with abortion doulas and grannies who used things like traditional medicine and herbs to help control reproduction, which was really an act of resistance. We also see the removal of Indigenous people from their land and again, kind of suppressing the births of Indigenous people in the colonial era. When we look at even the origins of social work and the settlement house movement, these movements really focused on the needs of poor white mothers and did not focus on the needs of people of color moving to the cities. And so as a result, a lot of Black and Indigenous social workers joined movements later on, like the Black Panthers, because ultimately reform and social change was not focusing on their needs. In the 1950s, again, we see social work's participation in the eugenics movement, which was basically a movement that talked about who was worthy of having children and sought to suppress the birthing of people who were deemed unworthy. So we saw sterilization of people with mental health challenges or developmental delays, sterilization of people of color that had that already had children, because again, their births were trying to be suppressed by this white supremacist kind of ideology. And social workers were often called in to help decide on these eugenics panels who was worthy of having children or who was worthy of not having children. We saw the implantation of long-acting birth control in folks in Puerto Rico without their consent. And that even continues up into the modern day when we see folks that are in detention by ICE. There was recently, a couple of years ago, a discussion of the fact that people that were put into detention by ICE were being sterilized as well against their will. So again, this focus on reducing the birthing capacity of immigrant populations. And then we even look now at the carceral state and child protective systems that, as I said earlier, really has divided up families, but especially families of color. And ultimately, when we look at people, we know more and more birthing people are in the carceral system and that they are shackled while giving birth. Their babies are taken away from them. And there's just this overrepresentation of children in CPS. So that's a very, very brief history of the reproductive injustices that have happened in this country. And what RJ does, and in this next video I'm going to show you, is really try to turn that on its head and reclaim the narrative.
The history of gynecology as a medical specialty has deep roots in the American South, but that legacy is as complicated as the history of the South itself. Correspondent Fred DeSam Lazaro has our report from Alabama's capital, Montgomery. It's part of Fred's series, Agents for Change, and our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
Welcome to More Than a Tour.
For some years, Michelle Browder has conducted trolley tours of Montgomery.
This is her apartment, so I would invite you to get out.
From Rosa Parks' home to the bus depot that's now the Freedom Rides Museum.
This is where they were beaten and bludgeoned, right here.
Alabama's capital is a living history museum of the civil rights era, with so many iconic events, people, and places.
Buses are coming. Oh.
But for Browder, artist by training, activist by leaning, there's one chapter of an earlier history that she's working to rewrite. It's manifest in a monument on the Capitol grounds to James Marion Sims. He was a physician who practiced here in the 1840s, developing tools for pelvic exams and a technique to suture vaginal tears called fistulas. But to Michelle Browder, that's only half the story.
There's nothing on the monument now that says anything about the women that he worked on.
Oh, absolutely not. Nothing of these 11 enslaved girls of African descent that were tortured, mutilated, without anesthesia. Nothing that talks about what they contributed, forcibly, of course.
No mention of them either in a well-known painting immortalizing Sims as the father of modern gynecology. Michelle Browder first saw it as an art student 3 decades ago.
I was triggered. From there, I promised myself that one day I will change that narrative. Got the welding station.
A promise renewed years later when she moved to Montgomery and discovered the statue at the Capitol.
I was horrified. I still am. If he's the father of gynecology, the father of modern gynecology, then where are the mothers?
Browder decided she'd do something about it. Relying heavily on Sims' own notes, she focused on the only 3 women actually named in his writings.
That is a lot of welding and sculpting. How many people doing this?
15 volunteers.
Today, about a mile from the Sims monument, are soaring wrought iron tributes to the women she calls the mothers of gynecology: Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy.
They didn't have autonomy, so it just makes sense for them not to have arms and feet.
The young women endured months of trial and error as Sims honed his technique to repair their fistulas. The humiliating vaginal injury, usually caused by obstructed labor, renders women incontinent and unable to bear children.
If you see around her legs there, that wire represents the silk suture. Sutures that he used to basically torture them. And then, of course, Betsy, her crown is made up of the speculum.
And tell us the significance of the flower in its place.
Yeah, so throughout all of the trauma, something came out of it that's been useful for women suffering from this condition.
The first time that I ever viewed the monument, I cried, and I didn't know exactly why.
Lauren Marcel and Alana Taylor are local artists and recent transplants to Montgomery. They were on the day's tour.
Just seeing that work erected in such a way as a healing device was beautiful.
The only thing that differentiates us from these women is time.
There was no such thing as informed consent from patients or subjects in experimental medical trials in Marion Sims' day. The only consent that mattered had to come from slaveholders who had a keen economic interest in the health of their workers, and because these were young women, a particular interest in their reproductive health.
Especially so after the transatlantic slave trade was abolished.
If it's outlawed in 1808, that we cannot go back and traffic folks from Africa, then where are we getting these people? From the neighborhood? Breeding plantations. Breeding.
Black women's, their wombs are the engines that maintain the institution of slavery.
Deidre Cooper Owens is a medical historian and author. As for anesthesia, she says, it was not commonly used in Sims' day. But his reason for avoiding it rested on a widely held stereotype that black people do not feel pain, something contradicted, she says, in his own work.
I call it racial cognitive dissonance. He holds on to the ideologies or sets of beliefs that are swirling in the 19th century, that black people are somehow different than white people biologically. But he'll write, this patient lost sense of herself and struggled violently as we had to restrain her during surgery. Why would you need to restrain a black patient who is insensible to pain?
And you look at today that even with all the advancements that we have, that African American women tend to have higher mortality and morbidity, and I think it's just a trickle down from the troubles that our ancestors had to endure.
LaToya Clark, a Montgomery obstetrician gynecologist, says anti-black stereotypes have endured through the years. Even today, she notes, studies find many providers believe African Americans feel less pain, that their complaints are exaggerated. The flip side, she says, is deep distrust of the healthcare system.
Do you have patients who actively want to see you because they think you're more culturally competent, because they think that you would better understand their
their predicament?
Yes, I've had numerous patients that say that I've seen a man gynecologist all my life, and now I want to see a female gynecologist, or I wanted to come to an Afro-American gynecologist.
For Michelle Browder, the next step in reframing Sims's legacy is quite literal. A mural based on that fateful painting, this time with Sims on the operating table. It will be installed in a new Mothers of Gynecology Center she's opening in a downtown Montgomery building that's brimming with history and irony.
This is the site of the Negro Women's Hospital.
The very site, it turns out, where J. Marion Sims experimented on his enslaved patients. When they weren't on the table, she says, these women became skilled surgical attendants, nursing women through their ordeals.
And tell us your grand plan for this space now.
Prenatal care, and then upstairs, a teaching clinic with the hopes of teaching empathy, dignity, and respect.
Browder says she's faced occasional pushback in this deep red state where Sims is revered for work that was indeed groundbreaking.
I've had some doctors say that I'm actually trying to stain this man's reputation, who's actually done something good. He was a man of his time. In any case, whether or not he was a man of his time, then his time was barbaric, and therefore he was barbaric. So let's start there, and then seek out ways to help and repair what's just broken.
And then there have been moments of grace, notably after she explained her plans for the new center to the white owners of the building.
She says, "Oh, Michelle, just little Miss Gone with the Wind." She was like, "We're just so proud of you. And if you're going to do all of that, we're going to let you have that building for $35,000.
It stopped prematurely, but basically you get the idea, right? So, so the idea there, right, is to center Black women, and RJ also centers femmes and non-binary leadership. And there's this great quote from the Combahee River Collective that says, if Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all of the systems of oppression. So RJ really focuses on the liberation, the collective liberation of folks who have been systematically oppressed. And just like Michelle Browder is doing, really seeks to turn the narrative on its head. So the tenets of reproductive justice are the right to have a child, the right to not have a child, the right to parent in safe and sustainable communities, and the right to bodily, sexual, and gender autonomy. The right to have a child is really important when, as Michelle was saying in the video, you think about the kind of violations of the bodies of Black birthing people across the centuries, and also even today, where we see that people of color, immigrants, people on medical assistance are much more subjected to obstetric violence and obstetric racism, having their bodies violated when they go to have babies. We know that folks of color are more likely to experience infertility, but have less access to things like in vitro fertilization. And we also see that Black people are 3 times as likely to die in maternal environments. So it's really important to focus on the safe right to have a child. We also see the detention and sterilization, as I talked about, of immigrant populations, and the importance of keeping families together. Oftentimes people talk about adoption, but the adoption system itself is also can be pretty racist at times in terms of separating people that, if they had the resources, would be able to birth and keep their children. So the right to have a child is a really important tenet of RJ. Then there's the right to not have a child. So when we look at this right, we look at 2 kind of major buckets, contraception and abortion. How do we keep people in charge of their bodies so that they can not get pregnant? And what resources do they have when they do get pregnant and they don't want to continue a pregnancy? There's something called the Hyde Amendment, which is basically this awful policy that federal funds cannot be used for abortion, which means that anyone on medical assistance, anyone that is employed by the government, so including like veterans as well, healthcare benefits, anyone that's in like the Peace Corps, any kind of government agency, they cannot use their health insurance or federal money for abortion. So that means that people will then have to pay out of pocket for abortion. We also know that abortion is banned in 13 states with very few exceptions, and people are dying from these abortion bans. More and more, we're hearing stories out of Georgia and Texas of people who are losing their lives because they're unable to get the necessary medical care that they deserve. So abortion and the right to not have a child, you know, RJ activists say whatever the reason for an abortion is the right reason for that person. And there should be unlimited access to that for folks in order to create the families or not create the families that they want. Because we also know that folks that have abortions are oftentimes already parents. The right to parent in safe and sustainable communities means that we need to look at things like child poverty. More than half of children living in poverty are children of color. We also know that folks in difficult neighborhoods, for example, are often exposed to environmental stressors, that people are building trash sites near areas of low income that affect children's health. So environmental justice is a huge piece of reproductive justice, and environmental racism. We also want to appreciate that there's a tremendous amount of gun and police violence enacted on minoritized groups. And this is something that ultimately affects the right to parent safely and with dignity. And then just access to prenatal care, access to medical care is so important for people to be able to parent. We also think about leave policies in this country for when people do have children. What do they look like? What does policies like FMLA, are they really helpful, or do they give us the bare minimum? I come from Canada, where you have paid leave for a year when you have a baby. So that's a shocking difference from what we see in the United States. We also see no government funded health childcare in the United States. So there are huge challenges when it comes to parenting safe and sustainably. Finally, the right to bodily, sexual, and gender autonomy, which means things like people should be able to have sex for pleasure and separate it from reproduction. They should also be able to create families as they choose and do with their bodies what they want. And so that includes things like gender affirming care. Right now, the ACLU is tracking over 500 legislative bans on gender affirming care, different policies that would restrict healthcare for transgender minors, bathroom bills that out trans children to their parents. So we need to appreciate that under RJ, everyone has the right to do with their body what they feel is best for their body. So how does this all contribute to anti-oppressive practice? Well, like anti-oppressive practice, RJ recognizes historical and cultural forces that impact on a person's reproductive life, and it empowers individuals and communities. This is really important. RJ is a community-based approach because reproductive justice activists look at things like courts and they say, well, the elites are on the courts. You know, old white men are appointed as court justices and oftentimes very conservative. Those traditional ways of seeking justice are not the ways that we want to seek justice. We want to do this through community instead. So RJ advocates engage in things like healing circles, tribunals, and convenings with their communities to approach issues. And again, RJ uses these indigenous and ancestral technologies, things like storytelling, myth, song, and arts-based approaches to dismantle white supremacist approaches to societal issues. So it's really a perfect approach to anti-oppressive practice and something that I encourage you to learn more about. These are just a few ways that you can get involved with reproductive justice, learning the history of reproductive rights of this country, and correcting people's mistakes. There are a lot of assumptions about, for example, who has abortions, and why, and for us to actually do some research on who actually the typical abortion seeker is really important. Support pro-choice political candidates and write letters to representatives. You can read my book. It's called Social Work and Reproductive Justice, A Necessary Fit. So that's a plug for my book. And it basically talks about the tenets of RJ as applied to social work. You can support efforts to repeal that awful Hyde Amendment that, again, prohibits the use of federal funds for abortion. And you can follow me and also Dr. Crystal Hayes, who I do a lot of work in RJ with. We have created the National Collaborative for Reproductive Justice in Political Education and Social Work, and we provide things like webinars, monthly briefings, writing circles for people who want to work on their writing. And in the spring, we're launching an activist school that centers storytelling as a way for people to really promote social justice and healing in their lives. So that is my spiel. And I will now stop sharing. And I know that was a whole lot of information, but I really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you for the applause emojis. Does anyone have any questions or comments I can help you with? Yes, the National Coalition is online. So the best way, we don't have a website right now. If you follow us on LinkedIn, we post all of our offerings. And last year we had an introduction to RJ webinar. We had an abolition webinar, and we had a white supremacy and environmental racism webinar as well. And we had about 250 people at each of those webinars, which was really incredible. We sent an open letter to CSWE about including RJ in the core competencies of social work, and we got about 600 signatures for that. And we had these monthly briefings with guest speakers who were talking about everything across the life cycle. We had Omishade Bernie Scott talking about menopause. We had folks talking about the carceral system and being trans and in carceral systems. So we have lots of great speakers. So the best way to learn about that is to follow us on LinkedIn. Susan, you've got your hand up.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I do have a question. Since laws have changed in the last 5-10 years, and as you mentioned, 13 states have now had these even more repressive policies. And I'm speaking as I have a cousin who's a medical doctor in Louisiana, just left because she cannot practice the way she wants to practice medicine, and she specializes in adolescent medicine. And I'm wondering, in these 13 states, I guess a couple questions. One is, are we seeing a flight of social work and other professionals out of these states because they cannot practice they want to? And my other question is there a way, and someone else made this argument to me, that in Texas, can you make, for example, as more and more businesses have moved into Texas, actually it's not helpful for them because who wants to draw people into states? I guess my question is, are there other ways that organizing in these states to really help push businesses and other organizations to either push changes in laws or to push them to move their businesses to other states that have more friendly laws? I guess that was kind of like a three-part question.
Yeah, so I'll answer the first one about social workers. I'm actually doing a research study right now on social workers in anti-choice states and their moral distress, because there's been a lot of research on doctors in anti-choice states who are leaving, who basically, as you said, are not able to practice the way that they want to, and they're experiencing such moral distress that they can't stay. So I'm doing a research study interviewing social workers, asking them about that. When our code of ethics calls us to support people's self-determination and we can't do that, how do we stay and what do we do? Or I'm really interested in learning about if there are underground ways of supporting folks, because when abortion was banned before Roe versus Wade, there were a lot of underground networks that supported people in getting abortions. And I'm thinking there are similar kind of networks happening in states like Texas and Georgia. I know from the social work end, there's a lot of push to not have conferences in these states and to not send their send the money. So I think there's CSWE is coming up in Georgia next year, in Atlanta, and a lot of folks really feel not good about going. SWR, which is our major research conference, is in DC, which is like occupied right now. And so a lot of folks are not wanting to go to DC and to spend their money in DC. So I think that, is there a big enough impact is the question. Are there other ways to deter organizations and businesses from setting up there? Unfortunately, these states have a good amount of folks that also support this legislation and these laws. And so it's hard to really know if it's making a difference. But it is a good kind of organizing strategy for social workers. It's a great question.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Let's see, what would your suggestions, first steps to getting involved? These types of resources were scarce where I used to live, so I'm a little bit lost as to where to support folks. So I would like learn first. I would go to, I'm gonna type in the name of a great website, which is Guttmacher, the Guttmacher Institute, which does really amazing work on tracking abortion bans and other healthcare that affects gender diverse people, really informing yourself and then looking legislatively at who supports policies that are going to engage reproductive justice, because lawmakers do listen to their constituents. If you write letters to them and you engage in your support for them, they do listen and they do take your feedback into consideration. So I would start in kind of like first educating yourself. And then one of my absolutely favorite organizations is called, I'm just going to put this in the chat as well, the Bridget Alliance. And the Bridget Alliance provides funds for people who are traveling out of state for abortions. And they're just a great organization to learn about. So looking into as well, like the National Abortion Funds, the Center for Reproductive Rights, kind of educating yourself first would be the most important first step. How can you practice these things in states where abortion is illegal? Will you face legal repercussions for advocacy? Yeah, so in Texas, you can actually have, I think it's a fine up to $10,000 if you're found to have helped someone to get an abortion. So it's, you know, you could have major financial repercussions. So you have to practice very carefully. There's an article by Frederick Reamer about how social workers can use the code of ethics to protect themselves and how to kind of document very carefully. A lot of clinicians, and this is happening in gender affirming care too, is we're changing the way that we document things in our notes so that we're not mentioning abortion outright, we're not mentioning gender affirming care or gender dysphoria outright. We're leaving our notes very, very vague so that if they were audited, they wouldn't be able to kind of lead to any trouble for a client or for ourselves. Crystal Hayes' personal page, LinkedIn, Crystal N. Hayes. Yes, that is the right LinkedIn page. Absolutely. Yes. The Bridget Alliance is amazing. Yeah, they're fabulous. There was a documentary on Hulu, and I can't remember the name of it, that looked at morbidity and mortality in Black women and Black birthing people. And I cannot remember the name of it, but it was a really powerful documentary. So when I remember the name, I will send it to Dr. Boone and have you all look into that, because that's really, it's a really powerful one. Yeah. Any other questions?
I think Amir put in the chat, I look forward to reading your book. Are there additional materials or, well, you just talked about documentaries, but any other materials that you recommend?
Any other materials? So the book is particularly the only one that deals with social work and reproductive justice. One of my favorite people to follow, I'm going to put her in the chat, is Monica McElmore. She's a nurse who does a lot of work in reproductive justice, and also the journalist Stacey Patton. If those of you are familiar with her, she does a lot of work on white supremacy, on child abuse, and the historical kind of factors leading to systemic oppression. So those two people are really great to follow as well. You can follow them on Instagram or LinkedIn or X if you're still on X. Those are some great people to follow too. Loretta Ross as well. And Miriam put in the chat, yes, ethical practice in a post-Roe world. But yep, there we go. So there's the article that I mentioned by Reamer, which is a really worthwhile one to read. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, you all. I'm gonna
Is
put
it,
my email in the chat. Yeah.
Dr. E, was it Aftershock? I just ChatGPT.
Yes, Aftershock.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
ChatGPT
Yes.
never fails when it comes to
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
TV shows. Yeah, Aftershock. I'm gonna watch that. It looks good.
Yeah, it's very powerful. So I put my email in the chat. If anyone ever wants to be in touch about anything related to RJ or the DSW, you know, I'm always happy to mentor and support social workers as they come up through their education and beyond. So thank you so much for letting me be here with you tonight.
Thank you so much. This was great. And such a joy. I'm gonna also, just for the class, I'm gonna make sure that you get all these resources in a list. Like I'll pull them from the chat and make sure you get all of the resources.
Great. All right, bye y'all. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was so good. Thank you, Miriam. That was a great recommendation.
Sure.
They're
Yeah,
great.
I was thinking of going to Rutgers because they teach there and I'm super interested in reproductive rights. And they're trying to like change the social work whole like field and our like credentialing bodies to be more inclusive of RJ, reproductive justice.
Yeah.
So yeah. And the link I put was just like for my individual class from Blackboard. So I'm gonna, I downloaded the PDF and I'll upload it to our class.
That would be great. Yeah, the link doesn't work for me.
Thanks, Miriam.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you, Miriam. Any overall thoughts? I know you all had great questions, but any overall thoughts?
Miriam and I are going down to Alabama. I do want to
All
go
right.
down to
I want to see that art.
I do as well.
All right. Well, I will see you next week. We're gonna be back at 6 o'clock next week. And let me know if there's any other questions. I'm gonna, like I always do, send out the recording and like a little blurb about what we talked about tonight and just what's upcoming for the next week. So have a great weekend and a great night.